Welcome back to DRM News Podcast. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into some recent controversies surrounding Rachel Reeves.
Yeah.
She's the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, kind of like the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury.
Right.
Big name in the Labour Party.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been some chatter about her CV and some past expenses.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a look at what's been reported, try to, sort of figure out what it all means.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, this is a prominent political figure.
Right.
There are going to be strong opinions out there.
For sure.
We're going to stick to, what we know from credible sources.
Absolutely.
And let you, the listener, draw your own conclusions.
Sounds good to me. Okay, first up, Reeves' time at the Bank of England.
Okay.
Her LinkedIn profile initially said she worked there from 2000 to December 2006.
Right.
But then a BBC investigation found that she actually left in March 2006 to go work for Halifax Bank of Scotland.
Yeah.
Or HBOS, as most people know them.
Yeah, and that's not an insignificant difference.
Right.
I mean, we're talking 9 months.
Right.
That's a fairly substantial amount of time to, just overlook.
Yeah.
The BBC even uncovered a photograph
Really?
of Reeves at an HBOS event in March 2006, along with testimony from someone who worked in HR at HBOS at the time, confirming her start date.
So what does this mean for Reeves's claims about her experience? Because she has publicly referred to her time at the Bank of England as like a decade, or the best part of a decade, citing it as like evidence of her economic expertise.
Right.
But if she left in March 2006, that shrinks it down to about 5.5 years,
Yeah.
including a year she spent studying at the London School of Economics.
It certainly raises questions. I mean, is this like a genuine oversight?
Right.
Or something, a bit more calculated?
Yeah.
And how does it affect public perception of her credibility?
Right.
Especially in her current role as chancellor, where, economic experience is so crucial.
Yeah, Reeves's team says it was an administrative error.
Okay.
And that she wasn't even aware of the incorrect dates on her LinkedIn profile before it was published.
Right.
And to be fair, the profile has since been updated.
Oh, wait.
But it does make you wonder about like the level of attention to detail.
It does. After all, we're talking about someone responsible for managing a nation's finances.
Yeah.
You'd hope for, a meticulous approach to accuracy.
Right.
Not just in public statements, but also in personal profiles that, that contribute to their professional image.
That's a really good point. It's interesting to think about what this might say about her approach to detail in other areas of her work.
Yeah.
Now, this Bank of England discrepancy isn't the only time Reeves's financial dealings have come under scrutiny. Let's move on to her time at HBOS, where things get a bit more complicated.
Absolutely. During her time there, from 2006 to 2009, a whistleblower came forward. Oh, wow.
With some serious allegations about misuse of expenses by Reeves and 2 other senior managers.
Misuse of expenses? What kind of expenses are we talking about here?
Well, the complaint centered around spending on gifts, taxis, dinners out, even a Christmas party.
Okay.
Things that on the surface might seem like, pretty typical business expenses.
Yeah.
But the whistleblower alleged that these expenses weren't within the bounds of HBOS's rules and policies.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What exactly were the allegations? Was it a question of like excessive spending?
Right.
Or something more serious?
Well, according to sources familiar with the investigation that followed the whistleblower complaint, internal audit looked into the claims and apparently found evidence to support them.
Really?
We don't have specifics about those findings, but it's important to understand that, even the presence of an investigation raises questions.
Yeah, for sure. So what happened next? Were there any consequences? Well, that's where things get murky. It seems the investigation never actually reached a formal conclusion. And Reeves herself denies any wrongdoing.
Okay.
She's stated publicly that she always complied with HBOS's rules.
Right.
And that she even left the bank on good terms, receiving a severance package and a positive reference.
So we have conflicting accounts. On one hand, we have a whistleblower alleging misuse of expenses and an internal investigation that reportedly found evidence to support those claims.
Right.
On the other hand, we have Reeves's denial and her assertion that she left HBOS with a clean record.
Yeah.
It's difficult to know what to make of that without more information, isn't it?
It is, and it's worth remembering that conflicting accounts are fairly common in situations like this.
Yeah.
We need to consider all sides,
Sure.
try to weigh the evidence as objectively as possible.
That makes sense. And of course, we want to emphasize that we're not taking sides here.
Right.
We're simply presenting the facts as they've been reported and encouraging you, the listener, to, critically evaluate the information and draw your own conclusions.
Exactly. There's no need to rush to judgment.
Right.
It's more important to be thoughtful and consider the nuances of the situation.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into the specifics of the HBOS expenses allegations, I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't the only time questions have been raised about Reeves's handling of finances.
Yeah.
There was also an incident in 2015, before she became chancellor, involving her parliamentary expenses.
Right. In 2015, Reeves was one of several MPs whose official credit cards were suspended.
Really?
Because they failed to verify some of their spending. Now, she did eventually clear the debt.
Okay.
But this incident, coupled with the HBOS situation, starts to paint a bit of a picture, wouldn't you say?
I think it does. It raises the question of whether these are isolated incidents or if they might indicate a pattern of behavior when it comes to financial management.
And that's a question worth exploring. Because if there is a pattern, it's something voters might want to consider when evaluating her suitability for a role like chancellor, which demands, the highest level of financial responsibility and accountability.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, let's delve into those HBOS expense allegations in more detail. What exactly was Reeves accused of?
Well, the whistleblower complaint, it was focused on a few key areas, but one of the biggest concerns was the use of bank funds for personal gifts.
Okay, yeah, that raises some red flags. What kind of gifts are we talking about, and how does that even work at a bank?
We're talking about things like handbags, perfume, jewelry, even wine for colleagues.
Okay.
And the amounts weren't trivial either. We're talking hundreds of pounds worth of gifts in some cases.
I mean, companies give gifts to employees sometimes, right? Is that really so unusual?
It's not unusual in itself, but it's all about the context and the rules surrounding those gifts.
Right.
HBOS had a specific system for rewarding employees called motivation or thanks cards.
Oh, think of them like gift cards,
yeah,
but with a lot more regulation around their use.
Okay.
The bank even sent out memos reminding employees about the proper use of these cards.
Wow.
Things like chocolates, flowers, vouchers. Those were generally acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Christmas gifts were allowed too,
Okay.
but with a strict limit of $25 to avoid any tax complications.
Ah, I see where this is going. So the
Well-
allegation is that Reeves went over that limit.
Exactly. The whistleblower claimed she used these motivation cards to buy Christmas gifts that were, well over that $25 limit. For example, there was a $49.9 handbag purchased for her personal assistant.
Wow. That's quite a difference. Did Reeves ever address this particular allegation?
She did.
Yeah.
In fact, BBC obtained emails showing Reeves pushing back when colleagues tried to clarify the rules around Christmas gifts.
Interesting.
She basically said she'd already ordered and paid for presents using the motivation card and didn't want to cancel them.
So it sounds like she was aware of the rules, but chose to disregard them. It's certainly one way to interpret the situation,
Yeah.
but it's also possible that there was genuine confusion about the policy.
Right.
Sometimes those things happen in, large organizations,
Sure.
and we don't have all the details about how clearly those rules were communicated.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that Reeves's manager at the time actually emailed her suggesting a higher spending limit for Christmas gifts, although this was later contradicted by another memo from the bank.
So maybe some mixed messages from management contributed to the confusion?
Right.
But even if we give Reeves the benefit of the doubt and say it was an honest mistake, wouldn't you say that these kind of lapses in judgment can still be a cause for concern, especially for someone in a position like chancellor?
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether it was intentional or not, it raises questions about her approach to, to financial management. And it feeds into a bigger narrative that's, emerging about her relationship with finances. We have the discrepancy on her CV, then this expenses issue at HBOS. And let's not forget the incident in 2015 where her parliamentary credit card was suspended.
Yeah, you're right. We can't ignore the fact that there's a pattern here.
Right.
And that pattern, it raises serious questions about her judgment and ability to handle financial matters, both her own and the public's.
It does, and ultimately it's up to each voter to to decide how much weight they give to these incidents.
Right.
Some might argue that they're relatively minor
Sure.
and shouldn't overshadow her overall qualifications for the job. Others might see them as, as red flags that raise serious doubts about her competence and trustworthiness.
That's a good point. It's important for voters to have all the information and make their own informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But before we jump to conclusions, let's hear what Reeves has to say about these allegations. She can't just ignore them.
Of course not. Reeves has vehemently denied any wrongdoing in relation to these expenses at HBOS. She maintains that she always followed the rules and that she left the bank with a clean record, evidenced by her severance package and positive reference.
Right.
Her team has also pointed to statements from former HBOS employees who corroborate her account and say they didn't witness any misuse of expenses.
So once again, we have conflicting accounts. It's difficult to know for sure what happened without access to all the evidence.
Yeah.
But even if we assume that Reeves didn't technically break any rules, the fact that these questions are being raised is damaging in itself, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Perception matters, especially in politics.
Yeah.
And the BBC's reporting on this issue has, at the very least, raised legitimate concerns about the culture of spending at HBOS during that time. It makes you wonder if there was a more relaxed attitude toward expenses, maybe even a sense that the rules didn't really matter.
That's a good point. And this brings up another important issue, the role of whistleblowers in situations like this.
Yeah.
If this employee hadn't come forward, would we even know about these allegations?
It's unlikely. Whistleblowers play a crucial role in holding powerful people and institutions accountable.
Yeah.
They often face significant personal and professional risks when they speak out.
Right.
So it's important to acknowledge their courage and the value they bring to uncovering potential wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And it raises questions about whether there were systems in place at HBOS to adequately address these kind of concerns internally.
That's a good point. It's not just about whether Reeves misused expenses, but also about whether HBOS had the proper checks and balances in place to prevent and address such behavior.
Exactly. This situation highlights the importance of transparency.
Yeah.
And accountability, not just for individuals, but also for the organizations they work for. So
we've talked about the Bank of England discrepancy, the whistleblower complaint at HBOS, and even the 2015 issue with Reeves's parliamentary expenses. It's a lot to process. And I imagine our listeners might be wondering what it all means. What's the takeaway here? How should we be thinking about this information?
I think the key question to ask is, how much do these past controversies matter when evaluating Reeves's current role as chancellor? Should we be holding public officials to a higher standard when it comes to, to their financial dealings?
Yeah.
After all, they're responsible for managing public funds.
Right.
And their actions, they reflect on the integrity of the government as a whole.
That's a really important point. It's not just about individual behavior, but also about the broader implications for public trust in our institutions.
Right.
And it raises the question of whether these kinds of financial controversies should disqualify someone from holding a position of such high financial responsibility.
Exactly. There's no easy answer. And ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide what they believe.
Sure.
But it's a question that deserves careful consideration, especially in light of the information that has come to light about Reeves's past financial dealings.
We've presented you with the facts, the allegations, the conflicting accounts. Now it's your turn to do your own research, to dig deeper, to think critically, and to form your own conclusions about Rachel Reeves and what this all means.
And remember, there's always more to the story than what meets the eye.
Yeah.
Don't rely solely on headlines or sound bites. Explore the sources. Consider different perspectives. Engage in thoughtful conversations with others who might have different viewpoints.
That's great advice. We encourage you to continue this conversation, share your thoughts, and engage in informed discussions about the issues that matter most.
Because at the end of the day, it's through open and honest dialogue that we can better understand the complexities of these situations.
Right.
And make informed decisions about the kind of leadership we want for our country.
Well said. That's all for this episode of DRM News Podcast. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a current event that's shaping our world. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious. It's interesting to consider the timing of these HBOS allegations. We're talking about events that happened, leading up to the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
A time when, the banking industry was under a lot of scrutiny for its risky practices.
That's a crucial point. HBOS in particular was heavily criticized for its lending practices and risk management in the years before the crisis hit.
Right.
Some might argue that a more relaxed attitude toward expenses was part of a broader cultural problem. Bank.
So is it possible that Reeves was just, operating within the norms of that environment? Maybe she wasn't intentionally trying to misuse funds,
Right.
but rather just following the lead of those around her.
It's certainly a possibility, and I think it's important to consider the context of these allegations when trying to understand, what happened.
Right.
Were these isolated incidents, or were they symptomatic of a larger cultural issue within HBOS?
It's tough to say for sure without more information.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth considering, especially given the fact that HBOS was eventually bailed out by the government, during the financial crisis.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there was a disconnect between how the bank was managing its own finances and the prudent fiscal responsibility we expect from those in charge of public funds.
That's an interesting perspective. It certainly raises questions about the culture of accountability within HBOS and whether there was adequate oversight of spending practices, particularly among senior management.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
But I think the most important takeaway for our listeners is this. When evaluating a public official, especially one in a position as crucial as Chancellor of the Exchequer,
Right.
it's essential to look at the full picture.
Yeah.
That includes, not just their stated policies and qualifications, but also their past actions and how they align with the values and principles we expect from those in positions of power.
I completely agree. It's about looking beyond the surface, examining the details and asking tough questions.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the decisions these officials make, they have a profound impact on all of our lives.
Right.
We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to hold them accountable for their actions.
We've presented you with the facts as we know them, the discrepancies, the conflicting accounts.
Right.
Now it's up to you to decide what you believe. Do your own research, dig deeper, and form your own conclusions about Rachel Reeves and the significance of these controversies.
And remember, this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider. Don't stop here. Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep searching for the truth.
That's all for this episode of DRM News Podcast. We encourage you to continue this conversation, share your thoughts, and engage in informed discussions about the issues that matter most.
Absolutely.
Until next time.